The rifle clicked. 3 men on horseback surrounded the cabin, dust swirling in the late afternoon sun. Ayla Vance pressed her back against the rough-hewn wall, heart hammering, while Colt Rayner stood motionless in the doorway, unarmed, unmoving, staring down the barrel of a Winchester aimed straight at his chest. The leader spat tobacco into the dirt. "She ain't yours to keep, Rayner." Colt's voice came low, steady as stone. "She ain't nobody's." The hammer cocked. Everything that had built between them over silent days and careful distances now hung on this single, burning moment. Would he step aside, or would he die for a woman he barely knew? The answer would change both their lives forever. If you want to see how far this story goes, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The trading post squatted at the edge of civilization like a wounded animal. Weathered boards, peeling paint, and the smell of horse sweat mixed with tobacco and desperation. Colt Rayner pushed through the door, the hinges screaming in protest, and stepped into the dim interior where flies buzzed lazy circles around dried meat hanging from the rafters. He wasn't here for trouble, just supplies. Flour, salt, maybe some ammunition if the price wasn't criminal. His ranch sat 3 days' hard ride from anything resembling a town, and he preferred it that way. Out there, a man could think. Out there, the only voice that mattered was his own. The proprietor, a grease-stained man named Hutchins with eyes like a weasel, glanced up from his ledger. "Rayner, didn't expect you till next month." "Ran low early." Colt's voice carried the gravel of a man who didn't waste words. He moved toward the counter, boots heavy on the warped floorboards, scanning the shelves for what he needed. That's when he saw her. She sat in the corner, partially hidden by shadow and a stack of crates. A native woman, maybe 25, with long dark hair pulled back and eyes that tracked every movement in the room like a hawk watching prey. Her wrists bore faint marks from rope, recently removed, and she sat with her back straight despite the chains no longer visible. She didn't look defeated. She looked dangerous. "Got merchandise if you're interested," Hutchins said, following Colt's gaze. "Found her 3 weeks back. Kiowa, I think. Or maybe Comanche. Hard to say. They all look the same after a while. Been trying to move her, but..." He shrugged. "Most folks around here want workers who don't talk back. This one's got spirit. Probably more trouble than she's worth." Colt said nothing. He'd seen this before. Humans traded like cattle, their humanity stripped away by economics and cruelty. It made his stomach turn, but he'd learned long ago that righteous anger changed nothing. The world was what it was. He turned back to the counter, pulling coins from his pocket. "Just the supplies." "Your loss." Hutchins began gathering flour and salt, his movements quick and practiced. "Though I'll tell you, she's healthy, strong. Could work a field or handle livestock. Some men might find other uses, if you catch my meaning." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Colt's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the transaction. Then she spoke. "Don't waste your money." Her voice cut through the musty air, clear, unbroken, almost amused. Colt turned. She was looking directly at him now, her dark eyes holding his with unsettling intensity. "I'll run first chance I get," she continued, her English flawless despite the faint accent. "I'll steal what I can carry and disappear. You'll wake up one morning with nothing but regret and an empty cabin. So unless you're stupider than you look, save yourself the trouble." Hutchins barked a laugh. "See what I mean? Mouthy as hell. I've half a mind to..." "How much?" Colt's question stopped him mid-sentence. The proprietor blinked. "For her?" "How much?" A slow grin spread across Hutchins' face. "Well now, didn't figure you for the type, Rayner. Let's see." He stroked his chin, calculating. "She's caused me nothing but headaches, so I'm inclined to be generous. $50, and she's yours. Final offer. $50. 6 months of careful saving meant for winter supplies and repairs to the barn roof. Colt looked at the woman again. She hadn't moved, hadn't changed expression, but something flickered in her eyes, confusion maybe, or the first crack in her armor of defiance. He counted out the money and placed it on the counter. Hutchins swept it up greedily, already reaching for a length of rope. "I'll get her tied up for the journey." "No need." Colt picked up his supplies, shouldering the sack of flour. He walked past the counter, past Hutchins' confused expression, and stopped in front of the woman. Up close, he could see the faint scar above her left eyebrow, the calluses on her hands, the way she held herself coiled like a spring. He pulled his knife from his belt. She didn't flinch, just watched as he bent down and cut through the thin cord binding her ankles. A symbolic restraint, easily broken, but a restraint nonetheless. He straightened, meeting her eyes for a brief moment. "You can follow me or you can run," he said quietly. "Your choice." Then he turned and walked out. The sunlight hit him like a physical force after the gloom of the trading post. He loaded his supplies onto his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and swung into the saddle. He didn't look back, didn't wait, just turned the horse north and started riding. He made it maybe 100 yards before he heard the footsteps. She walked 20 feet behind, keeping distance, her bare feet silent on the hard-packed earth. Colt didn't acknowledge her, didn't slow down or speed up, just maintained his steady pace, the sun climbing higher, the settlement shrinking behind them. Hours passed. The landscape shifted from scrub brush to rolling grassland, the frontier opening up in all directions like a vast, indifferent ocean. Colt stopped once to let Copper drink from a creek, and the woman stopped too, kneeling upstream to cup water in her hands. They didn't speak. The silence felt heavy with unasked questions and unspoken truths. When dusk began painting the sky purple and gold, Colt made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods. He unsaddled Copper, built a fire, and set about preparing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. The woman stood at the edge of the firelight, watching. "You got a name?" he asked, not looking up from the flames. Silence. Then, "Ayla Vance." He paused. Vance wasn't a Kiowa name. "Vance? My mother was taken when she was 14. A cavalry officer named Thomas Vance kept her until she died, bringing me into this world. He gave me his name before he sold me to a missionary school. They tried to beat the savage out of me." A bitter smile. "Didn't take." Colt absorbed this, the casual horror of it delivered in her matter-of-fact tone. "Colt Rayner." "I know. Hutchins said your name." "Right." He poked at the fire. "There's food here if you want it. Bedroll too in the saddlebag. I'll take first watch." "Watch for what?" "Anything. Everything. This land doesn't care if you're tired." Ayla moved closer, settling on the opposite side of the fire. She accepted the jerky he offered, but kept her distance, her posture alert despite the exhaustion that must have been crushing her. Colt understood. Trust wasn't given freely out here. It was earned in increments, tested constantly and easily broken. "Why'd you buy me?" she asked suddenly. He'd been expecting this question. "Seemed like you needed buying." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I got." She studied him across the flames, her eyes reflecting orange light. "Men don't do things without reason. They want labor, or they want bodies, or they want to feel powerful. Which one are you?" "None of them." He met her gaze steadily. "I got a ranch. It's small, needs work. I could use help, but I won't force it. You can leave any time you want. Tomorrow, next week, doesn't matter to me." "You're lying." "Maybe, but you'll figure that out yourself soon enough." She fell silent, chewing the tough jerky, her expression unreadable. Colt leaned back against his saddle, tipping his hat over his eyes. "Get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow." "You really think I won't run?" "I think you'll do what you need to do." He adjusted the hat. "And I'll do the same." The fire crackled. Night sounds emerged, crickets, distant coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass. Ayla lay down on the bedroll he'd indicated, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on the stars visible through the cottonwood branches. Colt could feel her vigilance, the way she cataloged every sound, every shift in the darkness. He understood. He'd been there himself once, after the war, when sleep felt like surrender and every shadow held a threat. It had taken years to shake that feeling. Some nights, he still couldn't. Morning came cold and clear. Colt woke to find Ayla already up, the fire rebuilt, and Copper brushed and ready. He raised an eyebrow. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. They ate in silence, broke camp efficiently, and continued north. The land grew rougher, rocky outcroppings, steep ravines, pine forests climbing the distant mountains. This was the frontier proper, where settlements gave way to wilderness, and a man's nearest neighbor might be 50 miles away. By the second day, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Colt would ride, Ayla would walk, and they'd stop regularly to rest and water. She never asked to ride the horse, and he never offered. That felt important somehow, like maintaining distance kept things honest. It was late afternoon on the third day when they finally reached the ranch. It wasn't much. A small cabin built from rough-cut logs, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, a corral that had seen better days, and maybe 50 acres of workable land surrounded by thousands of acres of nothing. But it was his. Every nail, every board, every fence post represented sweat and stubbornness, and the refusal to quit when easier men would have. "Home," he said, dismounting. Ayla surveyed the property with a critical eye. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. Bought the land 6 years ago. Been working it since." "Alone?" "Yeah." She walked toward the cabin, her bare feet leaving prints in the dust. Colt unsaddled Copper and turned her into the corral before following. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace, a rough table, and 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves holding supplies, and a few battered books. One window faced east, catching morning light. Ayla stood in the center, turning slowly. "Where do I sleep?" "Bed's yours. I'll take the barn." "That doesn't make sense." "Don't care." He set his saddlebag down. "There's a creek about a quarter mile south if you want to wash up. Clothes in that trunk might fit. Help yourself." He left before she could respond, heading to the barn to check on his small herd. 3 cows, a bull, and a handful of chickens that roosted in the rafters. Everything seemed in order despite his absence. Old Pete, the ranch hand from the neighboring spread 30 miles east, had kept his word about checking in. When he returned to the cabin an hour later, Ayla had changed into a simple cotton dress, patched but clean, and her hair hung loose and damp. She'd found the wash basin and soap. She looked different, still guarded, still dangerous, but more human somehow. "There's stew," she said, nodding toward the fireplace where a pot bubbled. "I found vegetables in your root cellar and some salt pork." Colt blinked. "You didn't have to." "I was hungry. Figured you might be too." She ladled stew into 2 bowls, her movements economical and practiced. "I can cook, among other things." They ate at the table, the food surprisingly good. Colt couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him. The solitude he'd chosen came with practical drawbacks. "Tell me the rules," Ayla said suddenly. "Rules? Every man has them. Things I can't do, places I can't go, ways I have to behave. Tell me now so I know what I'm dealing with." Colt set down his spoon. "Don't steal from me. Don't hurt the animals. Don't burn the place down." He paused. "That's it." She stared at him. "That's it? What else you want? A list of chores?" "I told you, I won't force anything. You want to help? Help. You want to leave? Leave. I ain't your keeper." "Then what am I doing here?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Colt considered his answer carefully. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe you're just passing through. Maybe you'll stay a while. Maybe tomorrow you'll be gone and I'll be out $50 and some pride. But right now, in this moment, you're safe. That's all I can offer." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps the possibility of it. She looked away, out the window where twilight was gathering. "I've never been safe," she said quietly. "I know." "How could you possibly know?" "Because I can see it. In how you move, how you watch everything, how you sleep with one eye open." He pushed back from the table. "I've seen it before. In myself." She turned back to him, curiosity breaking through her armor. "What happened to you?" "That's a long story. We seem to have time." Colt hesitated. He didn't talk about the war, didn't dig up those ghosts, but something about her directness, her refusal to pretend or placate, made him want to be equally honest. "I was a soldier," he began slowly. "Union Army, though I didn't much care about the cause one way or another. I was young, stupid, thought it'd be an adventure." He laughed bitterly. "Found out real quick what war actually is, mud and blood and watching friends die for nothing. By the time it ended, I'd seen enough killing to last 10 lifetimes. "So you ran?" "So I ran," he agreed. "Came west, bought this land, tried to build something that wasn't about death. Some days it works." Some days you still hear the guns, she finished. Yeah. They sat in the gathering darkness, two damaged people in a cabin at the edge of nowhere, connected by understanding if nothing else. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus. Inside, the fire burned low. I'll stay, Ayla said finally. For now. But the first time you try to own me, I know, you'll run. Colt stood, stretching his back. Fair enough. He headed for the door, then paused. Ayla? What? Thank you, for the stew. After he left, Ayla sat alone in the cabin, listening to his footsteps fade toward the barn. She looked around at the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture, the life one man had carved from nothing through sheer will. She'd meant what she said. She would run at the first sign of trouble, the first hint that this was just another kind of cage. But as she lay down in the narrow bed, a blanket pulled up to her chin, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absence of immediate fear. Not safety, exactly. Not trust. But the possibility that maybe, just maybe, not every man was a monster. It was enough. For now. The days that followed established a pattern. Colt worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, tending livestock, clearing land for next season's planting. Ayla watched at first, then began helping without being asked. She fed the chickens, hauled water, mended clothes, and cooked meals that transformed his simple supplies into something approaching comfort. They spoke little, but they worked side by side, and that created its own language. One morning, about a week after their arrival, Colt found her in the corral with Copper, stroking the mare's neck and speaking softly in a language he didn't understand. The horse, usually skittish with strangers, stood calm and accepting. You ride? He asked from the fence. My mother's people were horsemen. Some things you don't forget. She looked at him. Can I? She's yours as much as mine. Ayla swung up bareback, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to it. She urged Copper into a trot, then a canter, circling the corral with obvious joy lighting her face. It was the first time Colt had seen her smile. Really smile. Not the bitter twist of irony, but genuine happiness. Something loosened in his chest watching her. When she finally dismounted, breathless and flushed, she caught him staring. What? Nothing, just, you looked free. The smile faded. I'm not free. I'm just less trapped. Maybe that's the same thing. It's not. She handed him the reins. Freedom is a door you can walk through any time. This is just a bigger cage with a kinder warden. The words stung, though he knew she didn't mean them cruelly. She was simply stating facts as she understood them. Every act of kindness was temporary. Every moment of peace was conditional. The world had taught her these lessons thoroughly. Then prove me wrong, he said quietly. What? You think I'm just another man who'll eventually show his true colors. Fine. Stay long enough to prove yourself right. Or maybe, he met her eyes, maybe prove yourself wrong. She said nothing, but something flickered across her face. Challenge accepted. That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing wind and rain that hammered the cabin roof and turned the yard to mud. Colt reinforced the barn doors and checked on the livestock, while Ayla secured the shutters and moved everything valuable away from the window. They worked together instinctively, anticipating each other's movements, until the cabin was battened down and the fire built high against the cold. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated the room in stark white flashes. You afraid of storms? Colt asked, seeing her flinch. No, but I'm afraid of what happens when men are trapped inside with nothing to do. The implication hit him like a punch. How many times had she survived exactly that scenario? How many times had weather or circumstance left her vulnerable to violence she couldn't escape? Read, he said, pulling a book from the shelf, a battered copy of Homer's Odyssey, the pages water-stained and dog-eared. Or sleep, or just sit. I'm going to fix that chair leg I've been meaning to get to. He settled by the fire with his tools, focusing on the simple task of carpentry while the storm raged outside. Ayla watched him for a long moment, then picked up the book, running her fingers over the worn cover. I haven't read in years, she said softly. Then you're overdue. She settled into the chair by the window, and for the next few hours the only sounds were rain on the roof, the crackle of fire, the scrape of Colt's tools, and the occasional rustle of pages turning. It felt domestic, normal, like something people did when they weren't constantly bracing for disaster. When Ayla finally fell asleep, the book sliding from her lap, Colt covered her with a blanket and returned to his work. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Inside, 2 survivors had made it through another day without bloodshed or betrayal. It wasn't much, but it was something. The storm had passed by morning, leaving everything washed clean and glistening. Colt stepped outside to assess potential damage and found Ayla already up, examining the roof where several shingles had blown free. "We'll need to patch that before the next rain," she called down. "We? You have a ladder?" He did, and they spent the morning working together on the roof, Ayla proving surprisingly adept with hammer and nails. She worked without complaint, her movements sure and efficient, and when they finished, she surveyed their handiwork with obvious satisfaction. "Not bad," she said. "You've done this before." The missionary school believed in labor as salvation. We built our own dormitories, repaired our own buildings, worked our own fields. They called it character building. Her voice hardened. I called it free labor justified by Scripture. "That why you left?" "I didn't leave. I escaped. At 16. They sent men after me, of course. Caught me twice. The third time I made sure they couldn't." She paused. "I'm not proud of what I did to get away, but I'm not ashamed either." Colt climbed down the ladder, processing this. "Where'd you go?" "Everywhere. Nowhere. I worked as a translator, a guide, a cook, tried to make my way honestly, but a woman alone." She shrugged. "Eventually someone always tried to take what wasn't theirs, so I'd move on, until I couldn't anymore." "What changed?" "I got careless. Trusted the wrong person. Ended up in chains." She looked at him directly. "Until you bought me." "I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." "Is there a difference?" "Yeah, one means you belong to me. The other means you belong to yourself." She studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do." "Then you're either the best liar I've ever met or the strangest man alive." "Could be both." That almost earned another smile. They worked the rest of the day in companionable silence, and when evening came, Ayla cooked while Colt tended the animals. It felt like a routine now, established and comfortable. Dangerous too, because comfort bred complacency, and complacency got you killed. But neither of them said that aloud. After dinner, as Colt prepared to head to the barn, Ayla stopped him. "You don't have to sleep out there. The cabin's big enough." "Wouldn't be appropriate." "According to who? There's no one here but us." She gestured to the corner. "You could string a blanket across if it bothers you. But sleeping in a barn when you own a bed is just stupid pride." He wanted to argue, but she had a point. The nights were getting colder, and the barn, while serviceable, wasn't exactly comfortable. "All right," he conceded, "but I'm taking the floor." "Fine, suffer for your principles." He did string up a blanket, creating a makeshift divider, and settled onto a bedroll near the fireplace. It was warmer than the barn, he'd grant her that, and somehow safer, having her close where he could hear if something went wrong. Not that he'd admit that was part of his thinking. "Colt?" Her voice came soft through the darkness. "Yeah?" "Why aren't you married? Man like you, with land and a trade, seems like you'd have prospects." "Had a girl once, before the war." He stared at the ceiling. "She didn't wait." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She made the smart choice. I came back wrong." "Wrong how?" "Just wrong. Couldn't settle. Couldn't stop seeing things that weren't there. She tried. I'll give her that. But eventually even love runs out when you're living with a ghost." He shifted on the bedroll. "Been alone since. Easier that way." "Easier isn't always better." "No, but it's safer." She made a sound that might have been agreement or dismissal. Then, "I had someone too, a long time ago, another translator. We worked together, traveled together. I thought maybe—" She trailed off. "He sold me. When times got hard, he sold me to a brothel for drinking money." The casual devastation in her voice made Colt's hands clench. Jesus. "No saviors came. I got out on my own. But I learned my lesson. Trust no one, depend on nothing, keep moving. She paused. Until now. You can still leave. I know. That's why I'm staying. They fell silent after that, each lost in their own thoughts, their own ghosts. Outside, an owl called. Inside, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls like memories given form. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, two broken people slept through the night without nightmares. The 10th day dawned bright and clear. Colt was checking the fence line in the eastern pasture when he saw them, dust rising on the horizon, moving fast. Riders. 3 of them, maybe 4. His stomach went cold. He ran back to the cabin, finding Ayla hanging laundry. Get inside, now! She heard the urgency in his voice and didn't question it, dropping the shirt she held and following him in. He grabbed his rifle from over the door, checking the load. What is it? Riders, coming fast. He looked at her. Could be nothing. Could be trouble. It's trouble. Her face had gone pale but composed. They're coming for me, aren't they? Don't know, but we're about to find out. He positioned himself in the doorway, rifle ready as the riders approached. They slowed as they neared the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle. 4 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of people used to taking what they wanted. The leader, a bull-necked man with a scarred face, spat tobacco juice and grinned. Rayner, heard you made a purchase at Hutchins' place. News travels. It does, and some of us think you got cheated. That particular piece of merchandise wasn't Hutchins to sell. She belonged to us first. We'd like her back. Colt's grip tightened on the rifle. Bill of sale says different. Bill of sale don't mean shit out here, and you know it. The man's grin widened. So here's what's going to happen. You hand her over, nice and peaceful, and we ride away. Nobody gets hurt. You try to be a hero. He shrugged. Well, accidents happen on the frontier. Behind Colt, he heard Ayla's sharp intake of breath. Every instinct screamed at him to calculate odds, assess chances, find a smart way out. 4 against 1 was suicide math. Any rational man would step aside. Instead, Colt stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the riders and the cabin. She's not going anywhere. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Charged, dangerous, inevitable. The leader's grin faded. You're making a mistake, Reiner. Won't be my first. It'll be your last. The hammer clicked back on someone's rifle. Colt didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stood there with the kind of stillness that comes from having already accepted death and decided it was worth it anyway. The leader studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, recognition maybe, or the realization that whatever he saw in Colt's eyes wasn't bluffing. You're serious. As the grave. Another pause, tension coiling tighter. Then the leader spat again and gathered his reins. This ain't over. Figured as much. We'll be back. With more men. And next time we won't ask nice. I'll be here. The riders wheeled their horses and thundered away, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Colt stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, then lowered his rifle and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to find Ayla standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. You should have let them take me, she said quietly. No. They'll kill you. Maybe, but I made my choice. He walked past her into the cabin, setting the rifle back in its place. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You're safe here. That's all that matters. Why? Her voice broke slightly. Why would you die for me? You don't even know me. No. A Colt turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, he let her see past his walls. Because somebody should, he said simply. Because you deserve better than being hunted and sold and treated like property. Because, he struggled for words. Because if I can't stand for something decent in this godforsaken world, then what the hell am I even doing out here? Tears streaked her face, though her expression remained fierce. You're a fool. Yeah, I know. She crossed the room in 3 strides and, without warning, wrapped her arms around him. Not a romantic embrace, but the desperate grip of someone drowning who'd finally found solid ground. Colt stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then carefully, gently, returned the embrace. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other up, while the world waited outside to tear them apart again. When they finally separated, Ayla wiped her eyes roughly. What do we do now? We prepare. They'll be back, probably with more men. We need to fortify what we can, lay in supplies, make this place defendable. He looked around the cabin with new eyes, already cataloging weaknesses. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. You could still leave. Head north, lose yourself in the territories. They wouldn't follow that far. No, her voice was iron. I'm done running. If they want me, they'll have to go through both of us. Colt nodded slowly. Then we'd better get to work. The sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and copper as Colt hammered the last board across the window frame. His muscles ached from 3 days of relentless preparation, but there was no room for rest, not when death had announced its intention to return. That's the last one, he called out, stepping back to examine his work. The cabin now resembled a fortress more than a home. Windows reinforced, shutters doubled, heavy timber braced against the door. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it would buy them time. Ayla emerged from the barn carrying an armful of rope and spare leather straps. She'd transformed over the past 72 hours, the cautious survivor replaced by something harder, more focused. Her hair was tied back severely, and she'd traded the cotton dress for men's work clothes that allowed easier movement. I've set snares along the eastern approach, she reported, dropping her load near the door. Anyone coming that way will make noise before they get close. The southern route is too rocky for horses, but I marked it anyway. Stones stacked in patterns. If they're displaced, we'll know someone passed through. Colt nodded, impressed despite himself. You've done this before. Different circumstances, same principle. She wiped sweat from her forehead. When you're hunted long enough, you learn to think like the hunter. How many times? How many times what? How many times have you had to run, to fight? She was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. More than I can count, less than I deserved. She looked at him directly. Every time I was alone, that made me fast, but it also made me weak. You're not weak. I was. I am. Alone, you can only carry so much, defend so much, endure so much. Eventually, something breaks. She gestured between them. This is different. 2 sets of eyes, 2 pairs of hands, 2 people who refuse to quit. 2 targets, Colt added grimly. 2 fighters. He couldn't argue with that. They'd spent the last 3 days working with an intensity born of desperation, but also something else. Partnership. Real partnership, where each anticipated the other's needs, where suggestions were offered and accepted without ego or hesitation. It felt natural in a way that surprised him. Dangerous, too. Getting used to having someone meant the prospect of losing them hurt more. We should eat, Ayla said, breaking into his thoughts. Can't fight on an empty stomach. They settled at the table with cold beans and hardtack, neither bothering to heat the meal. Speed mattered more than comfort now. Outside, the first stars appeared, pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. Tell me about the war, Ayla said suddenly. Colt paused mid-bite. Why? Because you've been to battle. You know what it's like when killing starts. I need to know if you'll freeze, if you'll hesitate. Fair question. Brutal, but fair. He set down his food and leaned back, considering how much truth to offer. Shiloh, he began. April 1862. That was my first real fight. Before that, it had been skirmishes, little things. But Shiloh, he exhaled slowly. 23,000 men dead or wounded in 2 days. The ground was so soaked with blood it looked like a slaughterhouse. You couldn't walk without stepping on bodies. How old were you? 19? Ayla winced. A child. We were all children. Boys playing soldier until the bullets started flying, then we were just meat trying not to die. He rubbed his face. I killed my first man that day. Confederate soldier, couldn't have been more than 17. He came at me with a bayonet, screaming, terrified. I shot him in the chest, watched him fall, watched him try to crawl away. Did you help him? No. I reloaded and kept firing, because that's what you do. You shut off the part that feels, and you become a machine that loads, aims, fires, repeat. You stop seeing faces and start seeing targets, otherwise you go mad. Did it work? No. The word came out flat, final. I still see their faces, every single one. Sometimes I dream I'm back there, surrounded by the dead, and they're all asking why. Why did you kill us? Why did we die? And I never have an answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding. Ayla reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Will you hesitate? She asked quietly. When they come. Colt met her eyes. No, because this time I know exactly why I'm fighting. She squeezed his hand once, then withdrew. Good, because I won't either. They finished eating as darkness claimed the land completely. Colt extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into blackness, broken only by faint moonlight through the cracks in the shutters. They'd agreed on this. No lights after sunset, nothing to announce their presence or silhouette them against windows. First watch or second? Ayla asked. I'll take first. Get some sleep while you can. He heard her move to the bed, the creak of the frame, the rustle of blankets. Then her voice, soft in the darkness. Colt? Yeah? Thank you for not treating me like glass that might shatter. You're stronger than glass, more like steel. Steel can break too. So can I. But we're still here. Yeah, we are. He settled by the window, rifle across his knees, and began the long vigil. Outside, the night sounds continued their eternal symphony. Crickets, wind, the occasional cry of a hunting owl. Everything normal, everything peaceful. For now. The attack came on the fourth night. Colt had just traded watch with Ayla, laying down for what sleep he could steal when her hiss cut through the darkness. Movement. Eastern approach. He was up instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window beside her. She pointed toward the tree line where moonlight caught the edge of something that didn't belong. Metal glinting, the shape of mounted men trying and failing to stay hidden. How many? He whispered. At least 6, maybe more in the trees. 6. Better odds than he'd feared, worse than he'd hoped. Colt's mind raced through scenarios, discarding and recalculating. The cabin was defensible, but only to a point. If they had enough men and patience, they could wait them out or burn them out. We could run, Ayla said, reading his thoughts. Take Copper, head north while it's dark. They'd have to track us, and we'd have a head start. They'd catch us eventually, and next time we wouldn't have walls. So we fight. So we fight. The riders were advancing now, spreading out in a loose formation designed to surround the cabin. Colt counted 7, then 8 as more emerged from the shadows. Too many for a straight fight. They needed an advantage, needed to thin the numbers. The snares, he said suddenly. How sensitive? Tripwire sensitive. Why? If we can get them to charge instead of siege, they'll hit your traps, panic the horses, break their formation. And if they don't charge? Then we improvise. Ayla moved away from the window, returning moments later with a burning stick from the banked fire. Before Colt could ask what she planned, she opened the door a crack and hurled the brand into the yard, where it landed in the dry grass near the barn. The riders saw it immediately, saw the implications, fire spreading, threatening their approach, forcing a decision. Now they'll charge, Ayla said grimly. Nobody wants to fight through flames. She was right. The lead rider shouted something Colt couldn't make out, and suddenly they were moving, horses surging forward in a rush meant to overwhelm before the fire spread. The first snare caught the lead horse at full gallop. The wire, strung between 2 fence posts and hidden in shadow, caught the animal's front legs and sent it crashing down in a screaming tangle of limbs. The rider flew over its head, hitting the ground with bone-breaking force. 2 more horses went down in quick succession, their riders thrown or trapped beneath thrashing bodies. The remaining riders tried to veer away, but momentum and panic carried them forward into chaos. Now! Colt shouted. They fired simultaneously, Colt's rifle barking once, twice, Ayla's borrowed pistol cracking sharp in the night. A rider fell. Another clutched his shoulder, wheeling his horse away. The attack dissolved into confusion as horses reared and men cursed, trying to regroup. But the bull-necked leader was still mounted, still commanding, rallying his scattered forces with the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Burn them out, he roared. Torch the cabin. Colt's blood went cold. He'd anticipated many tactics, but not the scorched earth approach. These men weren't here to reclaim property. They wanted revenge, wanted to make an example. Two riders produced torches from their saddlebags, the flames already lit and hungry. They spurred their horses forward, angling for the cabin walls. The shutters won't hold fire, Ayla said, her voice tight with controlled fear. I know. Colt took careful aim at the nearest rider, breathed out slowly, and squeezed. The shot took the man in the thigh, causing him to drop the torch, which landed harmlessly in the dirt. But the second rider got closer, close enough to hurl his brand onto the roof where dry shingles caught immediately. Flames blossomed overhead with terrifying speed. We have to get out, Ayla said. Not yet. They're waiting for that. And they were. The remaining riders had formed a loose perimeter, watching the cabin like wolves watching a wounded deer, waiting for the inevitable flight. Smoke began seeping through the ceiling, thick and acrid. Colt's eyes watered as he loaded another round, trying to think through the burning in his lungs. They couldn't stay. But leaving meant running straight into guns. Then Ayla grabbed his arm. The root cellar. What? The root cellar under the floor. It opens outside, remember? Behind the cabin. We can crawl through, come up behind them. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was their only chance. Go, Colt said. I'll cover the door. We go together. Ayla, together or not at all? No time to argue. They dropped to the floor where smoke was thinnest, crawling to the corner where a trapdoor led down into the small cellar Colt used for storing vegetables through winter. Ayla yanked it open and dropped through. Colt followed, pulling the door shut above them just as the ceiling began to crack and groan. The cellar was cramped, dirt-walled, completely dark. Colt felt Ayla moving ahead of him, navigating by memory toward the outside entrance. His lungs screamed for clean air, his eyes burned. Above them, the roar of flames intensified. Then fresh air hit his face as Ayla pushed open the exterior door, little more than a wooden panel hidden by brush. They crawled out into the night, gasping, covered in dirt and smoke residue. The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames leaping high into the darkness, illuminating the scene with hellish orange light. The riders sat their horses maybe 50 yards away, watching their handiwork with satisfaction. They hadn't seen Colt and Ayla emerge behind them. Can you shoot? Colt whispered. Ayla checked her pistol, still clutched in her hand. 3 rounds left. Make them count. They circled wide, using the barn for cover, coming up on the rider's blind side. The fire provided both distraction and cover. Who watches the shadows when staring into the sun? Colt picked his target carefully. The bull-necked leader still mounted, still directing his men. He settled the rifle against his shoulder, found his breath, found his calm. Hey! He shouted. The riders spun, shock registering as they saw 2 ghosts risen from the flames. That moment of confusion was all Colt needed. He fired, the bullet catching the leader in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. Ayla fired simultaneously, her shot hitting another rider's horse, sending it bucking and throwing its rider. Then chaos erupted properly. Horses wheeling, men shouting, shots fired wildly in panic and poor light. Colt worked the rifle mechanically, years of training overriding conscious thought. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. A rider fell. Another fled. The remaining men scattered, their courage evaporating now that the tables had turned. Within minutes, it was over. Bodies littered the ground. Some dead, some wounded, all done fighting. The survivors disappeared into the night, the sound of hoofbeats fading into silence. Colt lowered his rifle, suddenly aware of how hard his heart was pounding, how much his hands shook. Beside him, Ayla swayed slightly, and he caught her elbow. You hit? No, just... She gestured vaguely. Alive. Yeah, me too. They stood together watching the cabin burn, everything Colt owned turning to ash and ember. 6 years of work. 6 years of building something, gone in minutes. I'm sorry, Ayla said quietly. For what? This. All of it. They came because of me. They came because they're bastards who think people are property. That's on them, not you. He turned to face her fully. And I'd do it again. Every single bit. She searched his face in the firelight. You've lost everything. No, I've lost a building. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. He looked around at the land stretching away in all directions, dark and wild and infinite. This place, these acres, that's what I own. Not the wood and nails. The cabin can be rebuilt. As long as we're breathing, we haven't lost. We. She repeated the word like testing its weight. You keep saying we. That a problem? No, just new. The fire began to die as it consumed the last of the structure, collapsing inward with a groan and sending sparks spiraling into the sky. They'd need to stay alert, make sure it didn't spread, but for now the danger seemed past. Colt moved among the fallen, checking for life, for weapons, for anything useful. 3 dead, 2 wounded badly enough they wouldn't be fighting again, the rest fled. The bull-necked leader lay unconscious, his shoulder bleeding but not mortally. What do we do with him? Ayla asked. Patch him up, keep him alive long enough to answer questions. He won't talk. Everyone talks eventually. They dragged the unconscious man to the barn and tied him securely to a support beam. Colt cleaned and bandaged the shoulder wound with clinical efficiency while Ayla watched the perimeter, pistol ready. When the man finally came around, he found himself staring into Colt's expressionless face. Morning, Colt said conversationally. You and I need to talk. The man spat blood. Go to hell. Been there. Didn't care for it. Colt settled onto a crate, rifle across his knees. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me who sent you, how many more are coming, and what it'll take to make this stop. Or I'm going to let my partner here ask the questions her way. And trust me, you don't want that. Big talk from a dead man. You think this is over? We're just the first wave. There's more coming, always more. Who's we? The man laughed, a wet rattling sound. You really don't know what you stepped in, do you? That woman you're protecting, she's worth money, lots of it. There's a bounty, $500 to whoever brings her back. Colt glanced at Ayla, who'd gone very still. Back where? North. Canadian territory. Some trading company wants her bad. Don't know why, don't care. But $500 makes a lot of men suddenly very interested in one runaway squaw. What trading company? Hudson Bay, or maybe Northwest. They all blur together when there's money involved. He grimaced in pain. Point is, you can't fight commerce. Can't fight that many men looking to get rich. So do yourself a favor. Cut your losses. Hand her over. Maybe they'll let you live. Ayla stepped forward, her face pale but controlled. Who put up the bounty? Some factor named Garrett, Malcolm Garrett, runs the northern posts. Apparently you cost him something valuable, and he wants payback. The name clearly meant something to her because she flinched. Colt filed that away for later. How long? He asked. How long before more bounty hunters arrive? Could be days? Could be weeks. Word's spreading, though. Every 2-bit gunman and tracker within 300 miles will be heading this way. The man's grin was ugly. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Colt stood, checking the bonds one last time. We'll see about that. Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the ruins of the cabin in shades of gray and gold. Ayla stood looking at the devastation, her expression unreadable. Malcolm Garrett, Colt said quietly. Who is he? Someone from before. Someone I thought I'd escaped. She wrapped her arms around herself. I worked for the Hudson Bay Company 3 years ago. Translating, guiding expeditions, helping negotiate with the tribes. Garrett ran the regional operations, a small man with big ambitions and a mean streak. What happened? He decided I was part of his territory, part of what he controlled. When I refused his advances, he tried to force the issue. Her jaw tightened. I broke his nose and 2 fingers, then disappeared south before he could retaliate. I thought that was the end of it. Men like that don't forget. No, they just wait and plan and eventually send others to do their dirty work. She turned to face him. $500, Colt. That's more than most men see in 5 years. They'll keep coming. Endless waves of them. Then we'll keep fighting. For how long? Until we're killed? Until you've lost everything? She gestured at the burned cabin. This is just the beginning. Next time it might be the barn, or the livestock, or you. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe he's right. Maybe you should cut your losses. Colt closed the distance between them in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders firmly, but not roughly. Listen to me. I didn't fight through hell last night just to quit now. I didn't watch my home burn so I could give up when things get hard. We're in this together, and that means we figure it out together. There's no figuring out $500 and an endless supply of men willing to kill for it. Then we change the game. We don't wait for them to come to us. We go to the source. She stared at him. You want to go north? To the territories? That's suicide. So is sitting here waiting to be killed. At least if we're moving, we're making choices instead of reacting. He released her shoulders. Besides, you know the country up there. You speak the languages. You have contacts. Had contacts. 3 years is a lifetime on the frontier. Some will remember. Some will help. He could see her considering it, weighing options, calculating odds. What did you cost him? What's valuable enough to justify this bounty? Ayla hesitated, then sighed. Information. I found out Garrett was skimming profits, selling company furs through side channels, pocketing the difference. I took the evidence, ledgers, receipts, correspondence, and threatened to expose him if he came after me. I thought that would be enough. You still have this evidence? Hidden, buried in 3 different locations between here and the Canadian border. Insurance, in case I ever needed leverage. Colt felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, but possibility. Then we have a weapon. We go north, retrieve your evidence, and we make Garrett a deal. Cancel the bounty or get exposed and lose everything. That's assuming he cares about exposure. Men at that level often have protection, connections. Maybe. But corruption spreads when it's exposed. His bosses might not appreciate knowing he's been stealing from them. Colt started walking toward the barn. We've got a wounded prisoner, a burned cabin, and maybe a week before the next wave arrives. We can't rebuild and we can't stay. So we move. We make this fight on our terms. Ayla followed, her steps quickening. This is insane. You got a better idea? No, but that doesn't make it less insane. Welcome to my life. They spent the rest of the morning salvaging what they could from the ruins, tools, supplies, anything fireproof or buried deep enough to survive. The barn had been spared, along with the livestock. Copper stood in her stall, agitated by the smell of smoke, but unharmed. We'll need another horse, Ayla said, already thinking practically. Can't make the journey double-mounted, not with supplies. There's 3 horses from last night's attackers still around. We'll take the best 2. What about him? She nodded toward the barn where their prisoner waited. We take him with us for now. Insurance, information, and bait if needed. He knows things we don't. Plus, leaving him here means he dies or escapes, and I'm not comfortable with either. They worked in efficient silence, loading saddlebags, checking weapons, preparing for a journey into hostile territory. Colt found himself watching Ayla as she moved, confident, capable, already thinking 3 steps ahead. She'd transformed again, the survivor instinct taking over, but with a crucial difference. She wasn't running this time, she was fighting. By midday, they were ready. 3 horses saddled and packed, their prisoner secured and ambulatory despite his wounded shoulder, weapons cleaned and loaded. Colt took one last look at the ruins of his cabin, the place he'd built to escape the world. Any regrets? Ayla asked. Plenty, but none about you. She smiled slightly. You sure know how to sweet-talk a woman. Never claimed otherwise. They mounted up, Colt on Copper, Ayla on a sturdy bay gelding, their prisoner on a smaller mare with his hands tied to the saddle horn. The land stretched before them, north toward the territories, toward danger and uncertainty, and maybe, just maybe, resolution. You know the routes? Colt asked. Well enough. There's a trading post 3 days' ride, run by a Métis woman named Marie. She owes me a favor. We can resupply there, get information, figure out our next moves. 3 days is a long time to be exposed. Everything's a long time when people are hunting you. She urged her horse forward. But we've got one advantage. What's that? They're expecting us to run or hide, not to come straight at them. Colt grinned despite himself. Element of surprise. Something like that. They rode north as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the burned ruins and broken bodies, carrying nothing but weapons, supplies, and a dangerous plan. Behind them, smoke still rose from the cabin's remains, a signal visible for miles. Ahead, the frontier waited, vast and indifferent and full of people who'd kill them for money. But for the first time since this nightmare began, they weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. And that made all the difference. The land changed as they rode north. The rolling grasslands giving way to rougher terrain, rocky outcrops, dense pine forests, and streams that ran cold and clear from mountain snowmelt. They traveled hard, stopping only when the horses needed rest, speaking little but moving with shared purpose. Their prisoner, who'd finally given his name as Dutch Keller, alternated between sullen silence and bitter observations about their chances. On the second day, as they watered the horses at a narrow creek, he decided to share his wisdom. "You're fools, both of you," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his saddle. His wounded shoulder had started to fester despite Colt's rough field dressing. "Even if you reach the territories, even if you find Garrett, what then? You think he'll just cancel the bounty because you ask nice?" "We're not planning to ask nice," Ayla replied without looking at him. "Then you'll die. Garrett owns half the territory north of the 54th parallel. He's got the company behind him, the law in his pocket, and enough hired guns to start a small war." Dutch laughed bitterly. "Two people and a wounded prisoner against an empire. Real smart." Colt checked Copper's hooves for stones, his movements methodical. "You talk a lot for someone whose friends left him behind to bleed." "They weren't friends. Just men working the same job." "Exactly." Colt straightened, meeting Dutch's eyes. "You think Garrett cares what happens to you? To any of the men he sends? You're all expendable. But you keep defending the system that uses you like ammunition. At least I know where I stand. You two are playing at something you don't understand. The frontier's got rules, even if they ain't written down. You're breaking every single one." "Good," Ayla said simply. She mounted her horse and urged it forward, done with the conversation. They rode until dusk painted the sky purple and gold, finally making camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by aspen trees. Colt built a small fire while Ayla tended the horses and secured Dutch to a sturdy trunk. The routine had become familiar over 2 days, efficient, wordless cooperation that spoke to growing trust. After they'd eaten a meager meal of jerky and hardtack, Ayla produced a battered map from her saddlebag, spreading it on the ground near the firelight. The paper was worn soft with age and use, marked with notations in several different hands. "We're here," she said, pointing to an unmarked spot between 2 rivers. "Marie's trading post is another day and a half northwest. After that, we have choices." Colt studied the map, noting the vast empty spaces marked only with warnings: hostile territory, winter passage only, no water. What kind of choices? "The safe route follows the rivers north, adds maybe 2 weeks to the journey, but keeps us in traveled areas. More people, more eyes, but also more places to hide and resupply." She traced a different line with her finger. "Or we cut straight through the Badlands here, save time, but risk everything. No water, no shelter, and if we run into trouble, we're on our own." "How long is straight through?" "Week, maybe 10 days if the weather holds, but it won't hold. Not this time of year. We'd be racing the first snow." Dutch snorted from his tree. "Badlands will kill you faster than any bounty hunter. Even the tribes avoid that country." "Nobody asked you," Colt said mildly. To Ayla, "What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment, weighing options that all carried different flavors of death. "Normally I'd say safe route, but normal ended when that cabin burned. Every day we spend on this journey, word spreads. More hunters mobilize. By the time we reach Garrett through conventional routes, we might be facing an army. So Badlands. She met his eyes across the fire. "But I need you to understand what that means. No margin for error, no rescue if things go wrong. Just us against country that doesn't care if we live or die." "Sounds familiar." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Yeah, I suppose it does. I suppose it..." They spent the next hour planning details. Water sources, potential shelter points. What to do if they got separated. Dutch watched with the fascination of a man watching someone plan their own funeral, occasionally shaking his head but staying quiet. When the fire burned low and exhaustion finally caught up with them, Ayla took first watch while Colt stretched out on his bedroll. Sleep came hard despite his tiredness, his mind churning through scenarios and contingencies. He'd been in tight spots before, but always alone, responsible only for his own survival. Having someone depending on him changed the calculations. made the stakes unbearably high. He must have dozed eventually because Ayla's hand on his shoulder jerked him awake, his hand already reaching for the rifle before conscious thought caught up. "Easy," she whispered, "just switching watch." He sat up, scrubbing his face, noting the position of the moon. 4 hours had passed. "Anything?" "Quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I thought I heard riders about an hour ago, distant, but they didn't come close." That was troubling. They should have more time before the next wave of bounty hunters caught up. Unless word had spread faster than expected. Unless someone had gotten smart about predicting their route. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep sharp." She hesitated, and in the faint moonlight he could see the exhaustion etched in her face. 2 days of hard riding, constant vigilance, and the weight of knowledge that she'd brought this trouble down on him. It showed. "Colt?" "Yeah?" "Back at the ranch when you bought me from Hutchins, what were you really thinking?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know, honestly. I saw you sitting there, saw the fight in your eyes, even when you were telling me not to bother, and I just—" He struggled for words. "I just couldn't walk away. Maybe that makes me a fool. It makes you different." She was quiet for a moment. "Everyone else who ever bought, owned, or claimed me wanted something. Labor, obedience, my body, my silence. You're the first person who wanted nothing." "That's not true. I wanted you to be free, still do." "Why? You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything." "Because freedom's the only thing worth fighting for." He met her eyes directly. "I learned that the hard way. Watching men die in a war that was supposed to be about liberation but mostly just killed boys who didn't understand what they were dying for. The only good that came from all that blood was some people got to choose their own path. Seemed wrong not to extend the same courtesy when I had the chance." She absorbed this, something shifting in her expression. "You're an idealist. I'm a realist who wishes things were different. There's a distinction." "Not much of one." "Maybe not." She laid down on her bedroll then, but didn't close her eyes immediately. "When this is over, if we survive, what then?" "We rebuild. Start over. Make something better than what burned." "We," she repeated that word again, testing its weight in the darkness. "You keep saying that like it's a foregone conclusion." "Isn't it?" "I don't know. I've never been part of a we before. Not one that lasted." "First time for everything." She smiled at that, finally closing her eyes. "Yeah, first time." Colt kept watch through the long hours, his mind wandering over the landscape of how they'd gotten here. A month ago, his biggest concern had been whether the barn roof would hold through winter. Now he was riding toward almost certain death alongside a woman he barely knew but would die to protect. Life had a way of upending careful plans. Dawn came cold and sharp, frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. They broke camp quickly, eating while they saddled the horses, Dutch complaining about his shoulder until Ayla shut him up with a look that could have frozen water. The land grew progressively rougher as they rode, the gentle slopes giving way to jagged terrain that forced them to pick their route carefully. By midday, they reached a high ridge that offered a panoramic view of the country ahead. Ayla pulled her horse to a stop, studying the landscape with the intensity of someone reading a map written in earth and stone. "There," she said, pointing northwest toward a thin line of trees. "Marie's place is in that river valley. We should reach it by nightfall." Colt scanned the terrain between their position and the distant trees, noting the exposed stretches, the lack of cover. "Lot of open ground. Can't be helped. This is the only approach that doesn't add another day." They descended the ridge carefully, the horses picking their way over loose scree and around boulders the size of wagons. Dutch kept silent, probably realizing that complaining while navigating treacherous ground was a good way to get left behind. They were maybe halfway across the exposed valley when Ayla suddenly reined in her horse, her head turning sharply to the east. Colt followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. Dust. A lot of it, rising from the horizon like a brown stain against the blue sky. "Riders," Ayla said unnecessarily. "Coming fast." Colt estimated distance and speed doing the grim mathematics. "How many?" "Hard to say. At least a dozen. Maybe more." "Can we make the trees before they reach us?" She studied the angles, her expression grim. "No. They'll cut us off. We need cover now." The valley offered precious little: scattered rocks, shallow depressions, nothing substantial. Nothing that would stop bullets or provide real protection. Colt's mind raced through options, discarding each one as unworkable. Then Dutch spoke up, his voice surprisingly calm. "There's a canyon, about a mile southeast. Narrow entrance, high walls. Used to use it for ambushing travelers when I rode with a different crew." Colt and Ayla exchanged glances. Trusting Dutch felt like a mistake in the making, but staying exposed felt like suicide. "You're lying," Ayla said flatly. "You want us to ride into a trap." "Maybe. Or maybe I realize those riders will kill me same as you. I'm wounded, can't fight, and I was part of the group that failed to bring you in. That makes me a liability." He jerked his head toward the approaching dust cloud. "My choice is die here or take my chances with you. Pretty simple math." "He's got a point," Colt said reluctantly. "He's got an angle. Men like him always do." "Then we make sure he goes first." Colt checked his rifle. "If it's a trap, he dies before we do. Fair enough?" Dutch actually grinned. "Fair enough. Now move before they get close enough to start shooting." They turned the horses southeast, pushing hard toward the canyon Dutch had described. The animals sensed the urgency, extending into a ground-eating gallop that ate the distance but also raised their own dust cloud. Behind them, the pursuing riders adjusted course, closing the gap. "There," Dutch shouted, pointing toward a narrow cleft in the rock face ahead. "Between those two formations." It looked barely wide enough for a horse. Colt's every instinct screamed trap, but the alternative was being caught in the open by superior numbers. Sometimes you chose between bad options and worse ones. They reached the entrance and plunged through, the canyon walls rising on either side to block out most of the sky. The passage twisted and turned, forcing them to slow down, the horses' hooves echoing off stone. After maybe 200 yards, it opened into a larger chamber. Not quite a box canyon, but close, with high walls and limited exits. "End of the line," Dutch said. "This is as good as it gets." Ayla was already dismounting, pulling her rifle from its scabbard. "We can defend this. Narrow entrance means they can't swarm us. They'll have to come through single file." Colt nodded, seeing the tactical advantage even as he cataloged the disadvantages. "As long as they don't have patience to wait us out. We've got water for maybe 2 days, food less than that." "They won't wait. Bounty hunters aren't siege experts. They'll try to rush us, get impatient." She moved to the canyon entrance, using the rock walls for cover. "And when they do, we make them regret it." Dutch, still mounted with his hands bound, watched them prepare with something like respect. "You two ever consider a career in outlawry? You've got the mindset for it." "Shut up," Colt said without heat, positioning himself opposite Ayla at the entrance. From here, they had clear lines of fire down the narrow passage. Anyone trying to force entry would be silhouetted against daylight. Easy targets. The wait was short. Within minutes, they heard horses approaching, then voices conferring in low tones. Colt recognized the pattern, men deciding who'd go first, who'd risk the dangerous advance into unknown territory. Then a voice rang out, amplified by the canyon walls. "You're trapped! No way out except through us! Throw down your weapons and we'll make this quick." "Quick for who?" Ayla shouted back. Laughter. "For all of us, honey. $500 splits nice among 12 men, less nice among widows and orphans. Your choice." Colt kept his voice level. "Or you could ride away, live to hunt another day." "Can't do that. Word spreading you killed 6 men already. Makes you dangerous, makes the bounty higher. The company's adding another 200 for confirmed kills." A pause. "So what's it going to be? Easy way or hard way?" "How about the third way?" Ayla called. "Where you try to come in and we decorate these walls with your blood." More laughter, but nervous now. They were getting the sense that their prey had teeth. "Hard way it is," the voice confirmed. "Don't say we didn't offer." Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Colt thumbed back the hammer on his rifle, watching the entrance, waiting. Beside him, Ayla breathed slow and steady, completely calm despite the odds. "You scared?" he asked quietly. "Terrified. You?" "Same. But I've learned fear's just information. Tells you what matters." "And what matters here?" He looked at her directly. "Not dying. And if we do die, making it so expensive they think twice about coming after the next person." She smiled grimly. "I can live with that. or die with it. The first rider came through fast, hoping speed would save him. It didn't. Ayla's shot caught him center mass, the impact throwing him backward off his horse. The animal bolted, riderless, back the way it came. Two more tried together, thinking numbers would help. Colt and Ayla fired simultaneously. One rider fell, the other retreated with a scream and a bleeding leg. Then nothing. Minutes stretched while the attackers reconsidered their approach. Colt used the lull to reload, his hands moving through the familiar motions automatically. "They'll try something different now," Ayla said. "Fire, maybe? Or wait for dark." "Let them try. We've held worse positions." "Have we? When?" He realized she was right. He'd fought in tight spots during the war, but always with support, with supplies, with some hope of reinforcement. This was different. This was absolute. "First time for everything," he echoed her earlier words. What came next surprised them both. Instead of another charge or a siege, they heard the sound of horses retreating, not fleeing, but withdrawing to a distance. Then voices raised in argument, too far to make out words, but close enough to hear the anger. "What are they doing?" Ayla wondered aloud. Dutch, forgotten in the back of the canyon, supplied the answer. "Fighting among themselves. Happens when the easy money turns hard. Some want to press on, some want to cut losses. If you're lucky, they'll split up and leave. And if we're not lucky, they'll settle their differences and come back with a unified plan. Either way, you've got time to think." Colt moved away from the entrance, trusting Ayla to keep watch while he assessed their situation with cold practicality. 3 horses, 2 fighters, 1 prisoner. Limited ammunition, maybe 30 rounds between them. Less food than that. The canyon provided shelter but also imprisonment. Classic double-edged sword. "We can't stay here forever," he said, thinking aloud. "No. But we can wait for dark, then slip out. They can't watch every angle in darkness. They can watch the entrance. Only way in or out." Ayla turned from her vigil, a strange look on her face. "Maybe not. When I was scouting earlier, I saw something. Up high on the western wall, there's a crack. Might be wide enough to climb." "Climb? In the dark? With horses?" "Without horses. We leave them, take what we can carry, climb out and run. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll have hours of lead." "That's insane. You keep saying that like it's new information." Colt looked at the western wall she'd indicated. 40 feet of sheer rock face, maybe more, with a visible crack running diagonally toward the rim. In daylight, with proper equipment, it would be challenging. In darkness, with pursuers below and no margin for error, it was borderline suicidal. "What about him?" He nodded toward Dutch. "Leave him. He slows us down and we can't trust him anyway." Dutch's voice carried from across the canyon. "I can climb. Shoulders bad, but my legs work fine. Take me with you." "Why should we?" "Because I know Marie, the woman whose trading post you're heading toward. I've dealt with her before. She'll shoot you on sight if you come in unannounced. But if I'm with you, if I vouch for you, she might listen before she kills you." Ayla looked skeptical. "You're lying again." "Maybe. But are you willing to bet your life I'm not?" The frustrating thing was, he had a point. They knew almost nothing about what they were riding into. Having someone who could make introductions, even a questionable someone, might mean the difference between success and failure. "We'll decide later," Colt said. "First, we need to survive today." The afternoon wore on with agonizing slowness. The voices outside continued their debate, sometimes rising to shouts, sometimes falling to murmurs. Colt and Ayla took turns at watch, the other resting as much as nerves allowed. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, the debate outside apparently reached conclusion. The voice from before rang out again. "Last chance! Come out now and we'll make it quick! Wait! And we make it slow!" Colt moved to the entrance. "Counteroffer. You leave now, and we don't hunt you down later." Big talk from 2 people in a hole. "We've been in worse holes. Crawled out of all of them." He let that hang for a moment. "How many men you willing to lose for $700? You've already lost 3. How many more before the split stops being worth it?" Silence. He'd hit a nerve, the economics of bounty hunting. Every dead man meant fewer people to divide the prize. At some point, the math stopped working. but apparently not today. "We'll take our chances," the voice shouted. "You've got until sunset, then we're coming in." Colt retreated from the entrance, meeting Ayla's eyes. "Sunset, that gives us maybe 2 hours. Then we use them. Scout the climbing route properly. Stage supplies. Prepare to move the moment darkness falls." They spent the remaining daylight in focused preparation. Ayla climbed partway up the western wall to confirm the route was viable, returning with scraped hands but a determined expression. Colt sorted their supplies ruthlessly: weapons, ammunition, water, dried food. Everything else got left behind. Dutch watched all of this with the intensity of someone whose life depended on their decision. "So? Am I coming or dying here?" Colt looked at Ayla. She studied Dutch for a long moment, her face unreadable, then nodded fractionally. "You come," Colt said. "But you go first. If the climb's a trap, or if you fall, that's on you. And if you betray us at Marie's place, I'll put a bullet in you myself. Clear?" "Crystal. One more thing. That information about Marie being trigger-happy with strangers, that true?" Dutch nodded slowly. "Marie Blackfeather doesn't trust easy. Lost too much to the wrong people. But she knows me, knows I pay my debts. If I tell her you're square, she'll listen. And you'll tell her that because you had chances to kill me and didn't. Because that woman there could have left me to die and patched me up instead. And because I'm tired of running with men who'd sell their mothers for $1. Dutch shifted against his bonds. "Also, you're my best chance of getting out of this canyon alive. Enlightened self-interest, as they say." Ayla made a sound that might have been a laugh. "At least he's honest about being dishonest." "Small mercies," Colt agreed. The sun touched the canyon rim as they made final preparations. From outside, they could hear movement, the bounty hunters positioning themselves for the assault they'd promised. Colt counted heads during a careful peek around the entrance. 8 men, all armed, all looking grimly determined. Not great odds, but better than 12. "Almost time," Ayla whispered. "Yeah." They waited as the light faded, watching the entrance, hands on weapons. The moment stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, just as the last light died and darkness claimed the canyon, the attack came. But not from the entrance. Gunfire erupted from above. Muzzle flashes lighting the rim of the canyon where someone had climbed to high ground. Bullets sparked off rock near where Colt and Ayla had positioned themselves moments before. "They're above us!" Ayla shouted, diving for cover. More shots, these from the entrance as riders charged through, using the high ground distraction to force the passage. Colt fired blind into the entrance, heard a scream, fired again. Beside him, Ayla's pistol cracked steadily, each shot deliberate despite the chaos. "The wall!" Colt yelled. "Now!" They ran for the western face, Dutch already climbing despite his wounded shoulder, moving with the desperate strength of a man who knew hesitation meant death. Ayla went next, finding handholds in the darkness more by feel than sight. Colt followed, the rifle slung across his back, trying not to think about the drop below or the bullets searching for him in the darkness. The crack in the rock was narrower than it looked, forcing them to squeeze through sections, using knees and elbows in sheer determination. Below, shouts of confusion as the bounty hunters realized their prey was escaping upward. More shots, but wild now, shooting at sounds in the dark. Dutch reached the rim first, hauling himself over with a grunt of pain. He turned immediately to help Ayla, pulling her up the last few feet. Together they reached down for Colt just as a bullet whined past his ear, close enough to feel the displaced air. Then he was up, over, rolling away from the edge as more shots chipped the rock where he'd been. They didn't stop running, couldn't stop, just headed away from the canyon into the broken country beyond, using darkness and rough terrain as shields. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, until lungs burned and legs trembled and the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Finally, in a small depression sheltered by boulders, they collapsed. "Everyone whole?" Colt gasped. "Define whole," Ayla responded, her breathing ragged. Dutch just nodded, cradling his shoulder. They'd escaped, left behind the horses, most of their supplies, and any illusion that this journey would be simple. But they were alive, free, and still moving forward. For now, that was enough. "How far to Marie's place?" Colt asked when he could breathe normally. Dutch pointed northeast. "On foot? 2 days? Maybe 3. Rough country between here and there? Of course it is. Ayla laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. Why would anything be easy? Because easy doesn't build character, Colt said, echoing something his father used to say before the war took him. I have plenty of character, thank you. Could always use more. They rested briefly, then resumed walking. Behind them, the canyon and its chaos. Ahead, unknown territory and uncertain allies. But they moved together, three people bound by circumstances and choices, walking into the dark frontier with nothing but determination and each other. The first night on foot was brutal. Without horses, they moved slowly through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and spirits in equal measure. Rocky slopes gave way to dense forest, then to boggy lowlands where every step risked plunging knee-deep into cold mud. Dutch's shoulder wound reopened sometime after midnight, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage until Ayla forced them to stop and restitch it by moonlight with thread pulled from her own clothing. Should have left me, Dutch muttered through gritted teeth as she worked the needle. Still can, she replied without sympathy. Say the word. He stayed silent after that. They walked through the remainder of the night, stopping only when exhaustion made further travel dangerous. Dawn found them sheltered in a grove of birch trees, their white bark gleaming in the early light like bones. Colt took first watch while Ayla and Dutch collapsed into sleep that looked more like unconsciousness. He sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his knees, and took stock of their situation with brutal honesty. They had 2 pistols, 1 rifle, maybe 20 rounds total. No food except what they could forage or hunt. A wounded man who might be leading them into a trap. And somewhere behind them, angry bounty hunters who'd lost prey and pride in equal measure. The smart play would have been to give up, head west, lose themselves in the territories where no one cared about bounties or past crimes, start over somewhere new. But Colt was done running, and more importantly, Ayla deserved better than a life spent looking over her shoulder. When the sun climbed high enough to burn off the morning chill, he woke the others. They shared a meager breakfast of wild berries Ayla identified as safe, washing it down with water from a nearby stream. Dutch looked gray with pain and fatigue, but he stood when prompted and pointed them northeast without complaint. How much further? Colt asked. Day and a half if we push, 2 days if we're smart about it. Dutch studied the sky, reading weather signs Colt couldn't interpret. Storm coming, big one. We should find shelter, wait it out. No time, we keep moving. You'll kill us all pushing through a mountain storm. The alternative kills us slower. Colt shouldered his rifle. Lead. They walked through country that grew progressively wilder, the signs of human passage disappearing until even game trails were rare. This was frontier at its most raw, unbroken, unforgiving, indifferent to human ambition, the kind of land that reminded you how small you were. By late afternoon, the storm Dutch had predicted began building on the northern horizon, dark clouds massing like an invading army. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and electricity. We need cover, Ayla said, no longer a suggestion, but a statement of fact. Now. Dutch led them to a rock overhang he claimed to remember from previous travels. It provided minimal shelter, maybe 8 feet deep, barely high enough to stand, but it would keep the worst of the weather off them. They huddled inside as the storm broke with savage intensity. Rain came in horizontal sheets, driven by wind that howled through the trees like something alive and angry. Lightning turned the world white and purple, thunder following so close it felt like artillery fire. Colt found himself back in the war for a moment, crouched in a trench while Confederate guns worked over their position, waiting for the barrage to end or for a shell to find him. Ayla's hand on his arm pulled him back. You're shaking. I'm fine. You're not. But that's all right. She shifted closer, sharing body heat in the cramped space. We all carry ghosts. They sat in silence while the storm raged, 3 damaged people pressed together against the cold. Dutch eventually dozed off, despite his pain, head lolling against the rock wall. That left Colt and Ayla awake, watching water cascade off the overhang like a curtain separating them from the world. Tell me about Marie, Colt said quietly. The real story. Ayla was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, she was Cree originally. Married a French trader named Jacques Blackfeather, had 3 children. They built the trading post together, made it work through sheer stubbornness. Then Jacques died. Cholera, fever, the stories vary. Marie kept the post running alone, raised the kids, dealt with every kind of man the frontier produces. She sounds formidable. She is. But she's also been burned. Trusted the wrong partners, got cheated out of profits, watched people she helped turn on her. Ayla pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. When I worked for Hudson Bay, I did some translating for her. She appreciated that I was honest, didn't try to shortchange her. We developed, not quite friendship, but respect. And you think she'll help us? I think she'll listen. After that, it depends on what we're offering and what she thinks it'll cost her. What about Dutch's claim that she'll shoot strangers? Ayla glanced at the sleeping man. That part's probably true. Marie's got enemies. People who'd love to see her fail, take her land, push her out. She's learned to shoot first and ask questions later. Comforting. This whole situation stopped being comforting when your cabin burned down. Fair point. The storm continued through the night, unrelenting. They took turns sleeping, though the term was generous, more like brief periods of unconsciousness interrupted by cold, discomfort, and the nagging certainty that they were running out of time. By morning, the rain had reduced to a steady drizzle, and the temperature had dropped enough that their breath misted in the air. "Move or freeze," Dutch said, his voice rough. Those are the options. They moved. The land was transformed by the deluge, streams swollen to rivers, low areas flooded, the mud thick enough to suck boots off feet. Progress slowed to a crawl, each mile feeling like 10. Colt's empty stomach cramped with hunger, but he pushed the sensation aside. They'd eaten during the war on less than nothing. He could manage. It was mid-afternoon when they spotted the smoke. Thin and gray, rising from beyond a low ridge maybe 2 miles ahead. Could be Marie's place. Could be bounty hunters. Could be anyone. But it was shelter and possibly food, and that made it worth investigating. They approached carefully, using the terrain for cover, moving quietly despite exhaustion. As they crested the ridge, Colt got his first view of Marie's trading post. It was more fortress than store. A solid log structure with small windows and a reinforced door surrounded by a palisade fence that showed signs of hasty but effective repair. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a few outbuildings dotted the compound. Most striking were the warning signs posted every few yards along the fence, painted skulls, arrangements of bones, and messages in multiple languages that all said the same thing: stay out or die. Charming, Colt muttered. She's not running a social club, Ayla replied. Dutch, you're up. Remember what we discussed. They'd agreed on an approach during the long walk. Dutch would go first, unarmed and visible, calling out to identify himself and vouch for the others. If Marie accepted him, they'd proceed. If she shot him, well, that was a risk he'd accepted. Dutch took a deep breath, then walked down the slope toward the compound, hands raised and empty. Colt and Ayla watched from cover, weapons ready. "Marie Blackfeather," Dutch called out when he was maybe 50 yards from the gate. "It's Dutch Keller. I need to talk." Nothing. The compound remained silent, no movement visible. Dutch tried again. "I know you're there. I know you can hear me. I'm not here for trouble. Got 2 people with me who need your help." More silence. Then a voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the drizzle. "Dutch Keller's a name I know, but the Dutch Keller I knew was running with the Crane gang last I heard. What's a gang enforcer doing at my door?" "Not with Crane anymore. Things changed." Dutch gestured back toward where Colt and Ayla waited. "Got business with the woman you're going to see. Name's Ayla Vance. Says she knows you." A pause. Then, "Ayla Vance is dead. Heard she got sold south 2 months back." "Heard wrong." Ayla stood, stepping into view. "Still alive, still running, still refusing to stay where I'm put." Another long silence. Then the gate swung open partway, and a woman emerged. Marie Blackfeather looked exactly like someone who'd survived the frontier through sheer willpower. Maybe 50 years old, weathered face, iron gray hair and a long braid, carrying a shotgun like it was an extension of her arm. She studied Ayla with eyes that missed nothing. "Well, damn," she said finally. "You're harder to kill than rumor suggested." Rumor's always been unreliable. Ayla walked down the slope, hands visible but not raised. Colt followed at a distance, trying to look non-threatening. Can we come in? We've had a rough few days. Marie's gaze shifted to Colt, assessing him with the same thorough scrutiny. Who's he? Colt Rayner. He's with me. That mean he's the reason you're running? That means he's the reason I'm still alive to run. Marie absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Finally, she lowered the shotgun slightly. Not a gesture of trust exactly, but acknowledgement that immediate violence wasn't necessary. Come in, but we're going to talk, all of it. And if I don't like what I hear, you're back out in the cold. She looked at Dutch. You too, though I'm surprised you showed your face here after that business with the Crane gang. That wasn't my choice, and you know it. Knowing it and forgiving it are different things. She turned back toward the compound. Come on, freezing my backside off out here. They followed her through the gate into a courtyard that was part trading post, part military installation. Colt counted gun ports in the walls, clear firing lanes, stored ammunition in weatherproof containers. Someone had thought hard about defense. Inside the main building, warmth hit like a physical force. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, and the smell of cooking food made Colt's stomach clench with hunger. Marie gestured them toward a long table. Sit, I'll get food. Then we talk. She returned with bowls of stew and thick bread, setting them down without ceremony. They ate in silence, not the companionable kind, but the wary kind where everyone's measuring everyone else and waiting for the first wrong move. When they'd finished, Marie refilled her coffee cup and leaned back in her chair. All right, start talking. And Ayla, I want the truth, all of it. So Ayla told her. About being sold at Hutchins Post, about Colt's unexpected purchase and stranger behavior, about the ranch and the attack and the bounty, about Malcolm Garrett and the evidence and the desperate plan to go north and end this permanently. She left nothing out, her voice steady even when describing the worst parts. Marie listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing. When Ayla finished, she sat quiet for a long moment, thinking. That's quite a story, she said finally. It's the truth. Didn't say it wasn't, just said it's quite a story. Marie looked at Colt. And you? What's your stake in this? $700 is a lot of money to throw away on principle. It's not principle, it's right and wrong. Colt met her eyes steadily. And I'm tired of watching wrong win. Noble, stupid, but noble. Marie turned to Dutch. What about you? How'd you end up traveling with these two? They captured me after a fight, patched me up instead of killing me. Figured I owed them something. Dutch shrugged carefully, favoring his shoulder. Plus, they're heading into territory I know. Seemed mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial, that's one way to describe being a hostage. But Marie's tone held a trace of amusement. She stood, pacing to the window to stare out at the drizzle. You know what you're asking? Going after Garrett means going after the company. They've got resources, connections, men. You're two people with some stolen evidence and a lot of hope. 3 people, Dutch corrected, if they'll have me. Everyone looked at him. He shifted uncomfortably. What? I said I owed them. Besides, Garrett screwed me over too, years back. Wouldn't mind seeing him taken down. Marie laughed, a short bark of sound. This gets better and better. All right, let's say I believe you. Let's say I even want to help. What exactly do you think I can do? Information, Ayla said. You know the territory, know the players. Where Garrett is, how he moves, who he trusts. We're walking in blind otherwise. And in return? When this is over, you get the evidence. Everything I took from Garrett's office, ledgers, receipts, correspondence, proof of how the company's being robbed by its own factor. That's valuable to the right people. Marie considered this, her fingers drumming on the windowsill. It is valuable. Could also get me killed if the wrong people find out I'm involved. You're already involved, Colt pointed out. The moment you let us through that gate, if Garrett learns we were here, he'll assume you helped us. True. So I'm damned either way. She turned back to face them. All right, I'll help. But not out of charity or friendship or any such nonsense. I help because Garrett's a cancer in this territory, and I'm tired of watching him spread. And because that evidence might be my insurance policy if things go sideways. Fair enough, Ayla said. Fair's got nothing to do with it. This is survival. Marie crossed to a cabinet and pulled out a map, spreading it on the table. Garrett's main operations are here, at Fort Sterling. It's not a real fort, just a trading compound with delusions of grandeur. But it's defended, and he's got maybe 20 men loyal to him. Colt studied the map, noting distances and terrain. How far? 4 days on horseback, week on foot. But you're not walking. I'll loan you horses. Can't have you showing up exhausted and useless. Why would you loan us horses? Colt asked suspiciously. Because I want them back, which means you have to survive. Marie's smile was sharp. See? Enlightened self-interest. It's contagious. What about the evidence? Ayla asked. I need to retrieve it before we confront Garrett. It's buried in 3 locations between here and Fort Sterling. Then we make stops. You dig up your insurance policy, we proceed to Fort Sterling, you make your play. Marie looked around the table. But understand this. I'll guide you, provide supplies, even back your story if needed. But I won't fight your war. When bullets start flying, you're on your own. We wouldn't ask anything else, Colt said. Good, because you wouldn't get it. She rolled up the map. You'll stay here tonight. Rest, eat properly, prepare. Tomorrow we ride north. We? Ayla raised an eyebrow. You think I'm letting you borrow my horses without supervision? I'm coming along, at least to Fort Sterling. After that, we'll see. Dutch grinned despite his obvious pain. You're enjoying this. Maybe a little. Gets boring running a trading post. This is the most excitement I've had in years. Marie's expression sobered. But don't mistake excitement for safety. What you're planning is dangerous, bordering on suicidal. Garrett didn't get where he is by being stupid or soft. He'll see you coming. Then we'll have to be smarter and harder, Colt said simply. Or luckier. Which you've been so far, I'll grant you that. Marie gestured toward a back room. There's bunks through there. Get some sleep. We leave at dawn. They filed into the indicated room, a simple space with 4 narrow beds and nothing else. Luxury compared to the last few nights. Colt claimed a bunk and lay down, expecting sleep to claim him immediately. Instead, his mind churned with possibilities and dangers. They were committed now, no turning back. Either they succeeded in neutralizing Garrett and ending the bounty, or they died trying. Simple mathematics with fatal outcomes. Can't sleep either? Ayla's voice came soft from the adjacent bunk. Too much thinking. About what? Everything. Nothing. The 1,000 ways this could go wrong. He turned his head to look at her in the dim light. You ever wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable? Every day. But delaying inevitable death is basically the definition of living. So, she was quiet for a moment. What happens if we win? If we somehow pull this off? Then we rebuild. Go back to what's left of the ranch. Start over. We. There's that word again. You keep calling attention to it. Because I don't trust it. Every time someone said we to me, they meant you'll do what I want. Colt sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bunk to face her properly. Then I'll be clearer. When I say we, I mean partners, equals. 2 people choosing to build something together because it's better than being alone. No ownership, no debt, just partnership. And if I don't want that, if I want to keep moving after this is done, then you keep moving. I won't stop you, won't guilt you, won't make it about what I want. He held her gaze. But I hope you stay. I hope we get the chance to find out what we could build together. That's the truth. She studied him for a long time, her expression cycling through emotions he couldn't name. Finally, she nodded once, a small movement full of significance. I hope so too, she said quietly. They lay back down then, the conversation complete, but its implications still settling. Across the room, Dutch's snoring provided rhythmic accompaniment to the rain on the roof. Eventually, exhaustion won and sleep claimed them both. Dawn came cold and clear, the storm having passed in the night. Marie woke them with hot coffee and a breakfast of eggs and salt pork that tasted like the finest meal Colt had ever eaten. They ate quickly, then set about preparing for the journey. Marie's horses were sturdy mountain-bred animals built for endurance rather than speed. She assigned them with the practicality of someone who knew horses and people equally well. The calmest mare for Dutch, a spirited gelding for Ayla, and a big roan stallion for Colt that reminded him painfully of Copper. "What happened to your horses?" Marie asked as she checked saddle cinches. "Left them in the canyon when we escaped on foot," Colt said. "Shame." Good horses are worth more than most people. She glanced at Dutch. No offense. None taken. It's factually accurate. They loaded supplies. Food, ammunition, blankets, basic medical supplies. Marie packed with the efficiency of someone who'd outfitted countless expeditions, wasting nothing but missing nothing either. By mid-morning, they were ready. Marie locked the compound behind them, setting traps and alarms that would tell her if anyone tried to break in during her absence. Then they mounted and turned north, 4 riders heading into country that grew more dangerous with every mile. The first day passed without incident. They followed game trails through forest and across open meadows where wildflowers bloomed in defiance of the recent cold. The land was beautiful in a harsh way, all sharp edges and sudden drops and views that went on forever. That night, they camped in a sheltered valley, Marie demonstrating the kind of wilderness competence that came from decades of experience. She built a fire that gave maximum heat with minimum smoke, positioned their bedrolls to take advantage of natural windbreaks, and set a watch rotation that ensured everyone got rest. First cache is tomorrow, Ayla said as they settled around the fire, buried in a rockfall near the old mission ruins. Mission's been abandoned for years, Marie commented. Good place to hide something, also good place for squatters, and worse. We'll deal with it. Yes, you will. Marie poked at the fire. Tell me something, Ayla. This evidence you're carrying, you really think it'll be enough? Think Garrett will back down just because you can prove he's a thief? I think it gives us leverage. Maybe not enough to force complete surrender, but enough to negotiate. Negotiate what? The bounty gets canceled, publicly. Written statement from Garrett himself saying it was based on false information, and we walk away alive. Marie snorted. That's a lot to ask for from a man who spent $700 trying to kill you. $700 now. Imagine what it'll cost him when the company finds out he's been stealing, when his reputation's destroyed and his career's over. Ayla's smile was cold. That's worth more than killing me. That's worth making a deal. Unless he decides killing you and destroying the evidence is cleaner. Then we make sure the evidence survives whether we do or not. Copies sent to the company's directors, to territorial authorities, to anyone who'll listen. We make it so killing us accomplishes nothing. Dutch had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. You've thought this through. I've had 3 years to think about it. 3 years of wondering when he'd come for me. Now that he has, I'm ending it. One way or another. They fell silent after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. Colt took first watch, settling with his rifle while the others slept. The night was alive with sounds, owls hunting, small animals rustling through undergrowth, the distant howl of wolves or coyotes. Normal frontier sounds, but each one made his hand tighten on the rifle. They were getting close now, close to the evidence, close to Fort Sterling, close to the confrontation that would decide everything. And despite all their planning, all their preparation, Colt couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Some variable they hadn't accounted for, some danger they hadn't foreseen. He just hoped they'd see it in time to survive it. The second day brought them to the mission ruins. Marie had been right. The old Spanish structure was barely standing, its adobe walls crumbling and its roof long collapsed. But the rockfall Ayla remembered was still there, a tumble of boulders at the base of a cliff. Third rock from the left, counting from the large split boulder, Ayla recited, clearly pulling the information from memory. Dig down 3 feet. Colt and Dutch worked the shovels while Marie and Ayla kept watch. The ground was hard-packed and full of stones, making progress slow and painful. But eventually, Colt's shovel hit something that wasn't rock, oilcloth wrapped around something solid. He pulled it free carefully, handing it up to Ayla. She unwrapped it to reveal a leather document case, still intact despite years underground. Inside, papers yellowed with age but still legible, ledgers, receipts, letters. The evidence that could destroy Malcolm Garrett. One down, she said, relief clear in her voice. 2 more to go. They rode hard the rest of the day, making up time lost to digging. The second cache was easier, buried in a hollow tree near a distinctive rock formation. The third would be the most dangerous, Ayla warned, because it was closest to Fort Sterling, close enough that Garrett's men might patrol the area. That third night, as they camped in heavy timber with no fire to avoid detection, Marie pulled Colt aside. You know this is likely a trap, right? She said bluntly. What is? All of it. Garrett's not stupid. He'll expect her to come for the evidence. He might even be waiting at Fort Sterling, ready to spring whatever he's planned. I know, but we don't have a choice. There's always a choice. You could run, take Ayla, and just keep going until you're so far away the bounty's not worth collecting. That's not living. That's just slow dying. Colt checked his rifle for the 100th time. We end this now, or we spend the rest of our lives running. And I'm done running. Marie studied him in the darkness. You love her? It wasn't a question, but Colt answered anyway. Yeah, I do. Does she know? Probably. I'm not subtle.
No, you're not. Marie was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you're both crazy. But I also think you've got a chance. Small one, but it exists. We'll take small. See that you do. She moved back toward her bedroll, then paused. Colt, when this is over, if you survive, bring her back through my post. I'll want to hear how it turned out. You could just come with us to Fort Sterling, see it firsthand. No, this is where I leave you. Tomorrow we get the last cash, then you're on your own. I've helped enough to satisfy my conscience. The rest is up to you. And with that, she walked away, leaving Colt alone with his thoughts and the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow would bring the final cash. Then Fort Sterling. Then the confrontation with Garrett that would decide whether they built a future or died trying. Colt looked up at the stars visible through the tree canopy. Those same stars that had witnessed countless human struggles across time. They didn't care about bounties or love or survival. They just burned. But humans had to care, had to fight, had to believe that fighting mattered. So that's what he'd do. Fight like hell. And hope it was enough. The third cache sat buried beneath a lightning-struck pine 2 miles from Fort Sterling, close enough that they could see smoke from the compound's chimneys rising against the morning sky. Marie had left them at dawn with a firm handshake and a warning to watch their backs, taking one horse and leaving them the others. Now it was just the three of them, Colt, Ayla, and Dutch, standing at the edge of everything they'd fought toward. Ayla knelt beside the blackened trunk, her hands working quickly to clear away debris and dirt. Colt kept watch on the surrounding forest, while Dutch, his shoulder finally healing enough to be useful, held the horses and scanned the opposite direction. The silence felt oppressive, like the moment before a storm breaks. Got it, Ayla breathed, pulling free the final oilcloth package. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the last set of documents, correspondence this time, letters in Garrett's own hand detailing transactions, shipments diverted, profits skimmed. Combined with the other 2 caches, they had enough evidence to bury him completely. Now what? Dutch asked. Colt studied the distant smoke, calculating distances and risks. Now we ride straight to Fort Sterling. No sneaking, no subterfuge. We walk through the front gate and demand to see Garrett. That's insane, Dutch said flatly. That's bold. There's a difference. Colt turned to Ayla. You said he's a businessman first, right? That he values profit over everything? Yes, but he's also prideful, vindictive. Then we give him a choice that appeals to his business sense while threatening his pride. We show him the evidence, explain that copies exist with instructions to be delivered if we disappear, and offer him a deal, cancel the bounty publicly, provide written proof that it was based on false accusations, and we disappear forever. He keeps his position, keeps his operation, just has to swallow his pride. And if he refuses, then we destroy him. Every document gets sent to the company directors, to territorial authorities, to newspapers. His career ends, his reputation burns, and he probably faces criminal charges. Colt met her eyes. But we make it clear that we'd rather deal than destroy. We give him the path of least resistance. Ayla considered this, then slowly nodded. It might work. Garrett's not stupid. He can do the math. Killing us accomplishes nothing if the evidence survives, and we're offering him a way to save face, claim it was all a misunderstanding. He'll never believe you won't use the evidence later, Dutch pointed out. He doesn't have to believe. He just has to accept that destroying us costs more than letting us go. Colt checked his rifle one final time. We're betting he's rational enough to choose the smart play over the emotional one. And if that bet's wrong, then we fight our way out or die trying, same as always.
They mounted up and rode toward Fort Sterling with the morning sun at their backs. 3 people carrying documents that could topple an empire riding straight into the heart of that empire's power. The approach was open ground deliberately cleared of cover, forcing visitors to cross 100 yards of exposed terrain before reaching the palisade walls. Guard towers flanked the main gate, and Colt could see riflemen tracking their approach. As they drew closer, a voice called down, "State your business." "We're here to see Malcolm Garrett," Ayla shouted back. "Tell him Ayla Vance has returned to settle accounts." Silence. Then hurried movement as someone ran to deliver the message. They waited in the open, exposed and vulnerable, while the guards kept weapons trained on them. It was a calculated risk. Garrett would want to see them, want to understand why they'd walked into his reach voluntarily. Curiosity would overcome caution. At least, Colt hoped it would. The gate swung open, revealing a courtyard similar to Marie's, but larger, more organized, more military. A man emerged flanked by 6 armed guards, tall, maybe 40, with the kind of lean face that suggested intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. His clothes were expensive but practical, and he moved with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Malcolm Garrett had to be. "Well," he said, his voice carrying educated Eastern tones incongruous with the frontier setting, "this is unexpected. The woman I've spent considerable resources hunting walks through my front gate. Either you're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." "We're practical," Ayla replied, dismounting slowly. Colt and Dutch followed her lead, hands away from weapons. "We're here to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Garrett laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "You cost me money, reputation, and considerable effort. You broke my nose and fingers. And you think we're going to negotiate? I think you're going to listen to a business proposition, because that's what you are, underneath everything, a businessman. And I'm about to show you why killing us is bad business." Garrett's expression shifted to something like interest. He gestured toward a building that looked like offices. "Very well, let's hear this proposition. Though I warn you, I'm not easily impressed." They followed him inside, the guards maintaining a loose perimeter. The interior was surprisingly refined. Polished wood floors, decent furniture, maps and ledgers organized with bureaucratic precision. Garrett settled behind a large desk and steepled his fingers, studying them like specimens. "Speak," he commanded. Ayla laid the 3 oilcloth packages on the desk, unwrapping them to reveal the documents. "This is 6 years of your illegal transactions. Furs sold through shadow channels, profits diverted, company assets stolen, names, dates, amounts. Everything the Hudson Bay Company directors would need to destroy your career and probably hang you for theft." Garrett's face went very still. He reached out slowly, pulling one of the ledgers toward him, scanning the entries. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get these?" "I took them 3 years ago, before I ran. I've been holding them as insurance against exactly this situation." Ayla leaned forward. "And before you think about simply destroying them, there are copies, sealed and held by people with instructions to deliver them if I don't check in regularly." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your entire future on that assumption?" Garrett set the ledger down carefully, his fingers white-knuckled. "What do you want?" "The bounty canceled, publicly. Written documentation that it was issued based on false information and that I'm not to be pursued, captured, or harmed. You provide that. We walk away and you never see us again. The documents get buried, the copies remain sealed, and we all move on with our lives. And I'm supposed to simply trust that you won't use this against me later? You're supposed to recognize that we're offering you the best possible outcome. We could have sent these straight to your superiors, could have sold them to your competitors, could have used them to destroy you completely. Instead, we're offering a clean break. We get our freedom. You keep your position. Everybody wins." Garrett stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, his compound operated with smooth efficiency. Men loading wagons, checking inventory, the machinery of commerce grinding along. He'd built this, Colt realized. Whatever else he was, Garrett had carved an empire from wilderness through intelligence and ruthlessness. "You humiliated me," Garrett said quietly. "Broke my nose in front of my men, made me look weak. You tried to force yourself on me. I defended myself. That's not humiliation, that's consequence. And consequences have to be paid. They have been. You've spent time, money, and resources hunting me. You've lost men, lost reputation when I kept escaping. You've paid plenty. Ayla's voice softened slightly. This is your chance to cut your losses, to make a rational business decision instead of an emotional one. Garrett turned from the window, his expression unreadable. And him? He gestured toward Colt. Who's he in all this? Someone who refused to let your hired killers murder an innocent woman, Colt said evenly. Someone who's tired of watching powerful men destroy lives because they can. A moral crusader. How tedious. But Garrett's eyes showed calculation, not dismissal. If I agree, what guarantees do I have that you'll honor your word? The same guarantee you're giving us. Mutual assured destruction. If we use the documents, you send people after us. If you break the deal, the documents get released. We're locked together in this, whether we like it or not. The smart play is détente. Garrett resumed his seat, fingers drumming on the desk. The silence stretched while he thought, while he weighed options and calculated outcomes. Finally, he looked up. I'll need time to prepare the documentation, to make it official and witnessed. That takes at least 2 days. We'll wait, Ayla said. Here? In my compound? Where else? Running now would violate the spirit of negotiation. Besides, you need us close to verify we're honoring our end. She paused. But we'll need quarters separate from your men, and our weapons stay with us. That's asking a lot of trust. We're all asking a lot of trust. That's what makes it work. Another long pause. Then Garrett nodded slowly. Very well. You'll have quarters in the guest house. Guarded, but comfortable. You'll take meals separately. And if any of you makes a move against me or my operation, the deal's off and you die. Clear? Clear. Good. He gestured to one of the guards. Show them to the guest house. Make sure they have what they need, but watch them. Any trouble, you know what to do. They were escorted across the compound to a small log building that was indeed comfortable. 2 rooms, real beds, a fireplace. The guard stationed himself outside the door, and they could see others watching from strategic positions. Prisoners in all but name, but alive and negotiating. Think he'll honor it? Dutch asked once they were alone. I think he'll try to find an angle, Colt said. Some way to get what he wants without giving up what we're asking. That's what men like him do. Ayla was examining the windows, checking sight lines and escape routes. Old habits. Then we stay alert. We've bought time, but time cuts both ways. They settled in to wait, taking turns on watch despite the guards outside. The first day passed slowly, each hour heavy with tension. Meals were brought, good food, which felt like a positive sign, and they were left alone otherwise. Through the window, they could observe the compound's operations, the rhythmic patterns of frontier commerce. That night, Colt took last watch, sitting by the window and watching stars wheel overhead. Ayla joined him sometime past midnight, unable to sleep. You should rest, he said quietly. So should you. She sat beside him. We're close now, to ending this, one way or another. Yeah. You ever think about what comes after, if this works? Constantly. I think about rebuilding the ranch, about teaching you to shoot better. I shoot fine. You shoot adequate. There's a difference. He smiled in the darkness. I think about mornings with coffee and evenings with conversation, about building something that lasts instead of just surviving day to day. I think about a future that's not just running or fighting. That sounds impossible. So did surviving this long. We've managed anyway. She leaned against him, a small gesture of trust and exhaustion. When I was younger, before everything went wrong, I used to imagine what normal life looked like. Having a home, waking up in the same place every day, not being afraid all the time. Then I lost that. Started thinking it was fantasy, something only other people got to have. And now? Now I think maybe it's possible. With you, if we survive this. She turned to look at him. That scares me almost as much as dying, because wanting something means it can be taken away. Everything can be taken away. That's not a reason to stop wanting. Colt took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. Whatever happens tomorrow or the next day, I want you to know that. I know, I've known for a while. Her voice was soft. I love you too. even though it's terrifying and irrational and probably going to end badly. Might not end badly. Statistically unlikely. We've beaten longer odds. They sat together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other through chaos and desperation, holding on to hope and each other while the frontier night enfolded them. Eventually, Ayla dozed off against his shoulder and Colt kept watch alone, protecting the woman who'd become his reason for fighting. Morning brought Malcolm Garrett to their door carrying a leather folder. "The documentation is prepared," he said without preamble, "witnessed by 3 separate parties stamped with the company seal, officially canceling all bounties and charges against Ayla Vance. You're declared a free citizen with no outstanding warrants or obligations." Ayla took the folder, examining the documents carefully. Colt read over her shoulder, looking for loopholes or tricks. But it appeared legitimate, formal language, proper signatures, everything needed to make it binding. "This is acceptable," Ayla said finally. "Then we have a deal. The documents you stole remain sealed, and you disappear from my territory. I never want to see you again." The feeling's mutual. Garrett's expression was cold stone. "Know this. If you ever use those documents, if you ever breathe a word of what you know, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Deal or no deal? Understood?" "Perfectly. And understand this. If you ever come after us, ever send anyone after us, every director in the Hudson Bay Company gets a complete set of evidence, along with territorial authorities and 3 different newspapers. You'll be finished before we're cold." They stood in stalemate, mutual hatred and mutual necessity binding them. Finally, Garrett stepped back. "Your horses are saddled, supplies provided. Leave now and don't come back." They didn't need to be told twice. Within 15 minutes, they were mounted and riding south, putting distance between themselves and Fort Sterling as fast as the horses could manage. No one followed. No shots rang out. Garrett was honoring the deal, at least for now. They rode hard all day, not speaking, focused only on escape and distance. When they finally stopped at sunset, they were miles into wild country with no signs of pursuit. "We did it," Dutch said, sounding almost surprised. "We actually did it." "Don't celebrate yet," Ayla cautioned. "Not until we're back at Marie's, not until we've put more distance between us and Garrett." But despite the caution, Colt could see the tension bleeding out of her shoulders, the fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years finally beginning to release its grip. They'd won. Against impossible odds, through desperate gambles and blind luck, they'd won. That night, camped in a sheltered hollow, Ayla pulled out the official documents and read them again by firelight, as if needing to confirm they were real. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's actually over. The bounty's over. We've still got to rebuild everything we lost." Colt poked at the fire. "But yeah, the running part is done. What about you?" Ayla looked at Dutch. "What are your plans?" Dutch had been quiet most of the ride, and now he shrugged carefully. "Hadn't thought much past surviving. Figure I'll head west, see what opportunities exist for a man with a recently developed conscience." "You could come south with us," Colt offered. "Ranch could use extra hands during rebuilding." "Appreciate it, but no. You two deserve to build something without my kind of history hanging around." Dutch smiled faintly. "Besides, I'm not much for domesticity. Frontier suits me better." "The offer stands if you change your mind." "I'll remember that." They parted ways 2 days later at Marie's trading post, Dutch heading west with supplies and one of the horses, Colt and Ayla continuing south toward what remained of the ranch. Marie accepted the return of her horses with satisfaction and demanded the full story, which Ayla provided while Colt restocked supplies. "You actually pulled it off," Marie said when the tale concluded. "I'm impressed, and slightly concerned about what it means when people like you start winning." "It means the frontier's changing," Ayla replied. "Maybe for the better." "Maybe. Or maybe you're just an anomaly. Time will tell." Marie walked them to the gate when they left. "You're welcome back any time. And if you ever need anything, information, supplies, a place to hide, my door's open. Thank you for everything. Thank yourself. You're the ones who fought for it." Marie gripped Ayla's shoulder briefly. "Build something good. Make it worth the cost." The journey south was slower, less desperate, almost peaceful. They followed rivers and game trails, camped under stars that no longer felt threatening, talked about plans and possibilities. The land that had felt hostile during their flight north now seemed simply indifferent, neither helping nor hindering, just existing. When they finally reached what remained of Colt's ranch, it was late afternoon and the autumn sun painted everything gold. The cabin was still a blackened ruin, the barn still standing but showing signs of neglect. But the land itself was unchanged, rolling acres of grass and sky, the creek running clear, the mountains standing watch to the west. "Not much to look at," Colt said. "It's perfect." Ayla dismounted, walking through the ruins, her fingers trailing over charred wood. "We can rebuild this. Make it better. We'll need to work through winter, get at least basic shelter up before snow flies." "Then we better get started." And they did. That very afternoon, Colt began planning the new cabin while Ayla inventoried what could be salvaged from the old. They worked side by side as evening fell, two people building a future from ashes and determination. Over the following weeks, they established a routine that felt like healing. Rise with the sun, work until exhaustion, sleep without nightmares. Slowly, the new cabin took shape, larger than the old one, with 2 rooms and proper windows. They hired help from a neighboring ranch when needed, the news of the canceled bounty having spread enough that people no longer saw Ayla as dangerous contraband. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed everything in white silence. They worked inside then, finishing the interior, building furniture, making the space truly theirs. On the longest night of the year, they moved in properly, lighting a fire in the new fireplace and sharing a meal at a table they'd built together. "To new beginnings," Colt said, raising a cup of whiskey. "To survived endings," Ayla countered, clinking her cup against his, "and to not having to run anymore." They drank, the whiskey burning warm, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside while they sat safe and together inside. Later, as they lay in the bed positioned near the fireplace for warmth, Ayla spoke into the darkness. "Do you ever think about them? The men we killed?" "Sometimes. Mostly, I think they made choices that led them to bad ends. Same as we all do. That's cold comfort. It's honest comfort. We didn't start this fight, we just refused to lose it." He turned to face her. "You carry enough weight already. Don't add guilt for surviving." "Is that what you tell yourself about the war?" "Every day. Doesn't always work, but I keep trying." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We did what we had to do. We saved each other. That's enough." She kissed him then, gentle and certain, and in that moment the past felt truly past. Not forgotten, but no longer controlling. They'd survived, they'd won, and now they had the chance to build something neither had believed possible. Spring came eventually, bringing green to the land and new livestock to the ranch. Word spread that Colt Rayner's place was operating again, and occasionally travelers stopped seeking supplies or shelter. They were always welcome, always treated fairly, and they always left with stories of the quiet rancher and his fierce partner who'd faced down an empire and lived to tell about it. One such traveler was Dutch, arriving unannounced on a warm May morning. "Thought I'd check on my investment," he said by way of greeting, his shoulder finally fully healed. "Investment?" Colt asked, amused. "Helped get you here. Figure I'm entitled to see how it turned out." Dutch looked around at the rebuilt ranch, the healthy livestock, the garden Ayla had started. "Looks like it turned out pretty well." "Better than expected," Ayla agreed. "You staying for dinner?" "If you're offering." They ate together that evening, sharing news and stories, the conversation easy in ways it hadn't been during their desperate flight north. Dutch had found work as a guide for a mining expedition, legitimate work that paid honest money. He seemed different, still hard-edged, still frontier practical, but with some of the bitterness leached away. "Ever hear from Garrett?" he asked as the meal wound down. "Not a word. I check in with Marie periodically. She has contacts who'd know if he violated the deal. So far, nothing." Ayla refilled his coffee. "I think he's smart enough to know that détente serves him better than revenge." "And the documents?" "Still sealed, still with trusted hands. Insurance we hope we never need to collect on." Dutch nodded, apparently satisfied. He left the next morning with promises to visit again, disappearing into the frontier that had shaped them all. Life continued its steady rhythm. Seasons changed, the ranch grew, and slowly the desperation that had defined their early relationship transformed into something deeper and more permanent. They married in a simple ceremony the following year, exchanged vows under the same sky that had witnessed their struggles, promised futures they both knew were fragile but worth fighting for. On their wedding night, as they lay together in the cabin they'd built from nothing, Ayla traced the scars on Colt's chest, marks from battles he rarely discussed. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Buying me that day? Everything that came after?" "Never. Not once." He caught her hand, holding it over his heart. "Best decision I ever made." "Even though it cost you everything?" "It didn't cost me everything. It cost me a building and some peace of mind. But it gave me you. Gave me purpose. Gave me a reason to be better than I was." He kissed her forehead. "That's not a cost, that's a bargain. You're too good for this world, and you're too stubborn for it. We balance." She laughed at that, the sound free and genuine, and they fell asleep holding each other while the frontier night kept its eternal watch outside. Years passed. The ranch prospered. They took in a handful of workers who needed second chances. Men and women running from pasts they couldn't change, looking for futures they could build. The place became known as somewhere people could start over, where questions about history weren't asked and judgments weren't passed. Malcolm Garrett's name occasionally surfaced in news from the north, a promotion here, a successful venture there. The documents remained sealed, the détente holding. Whatever hatred still existed between them had cooled to professional distance, an understanding that their paths would never cross again. Marie visited once, riding south to see what they'd built. She stayed 3 days, helping with the difficult calving and sharing stories of the changing frontier. Before she left, she pulled Ayla aside. "You've built something remarkable here," Marie said. "Not just the ranch, the life, the peace. That's rare on the frontier. We got lucky. You got smart, and you got each other. That counts for more than luck." Marie mounted her horse, preparing to leave. "Keep building. Keep being proof that people can survive the worst and still make something beautiful." And they did. Through harsh winters and dry summers, through setbacks and small victories, they kept building. Children came eventually, first a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and fierce spirit, then a son with his father's quiet determination. The ranch expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the stories of how it all began became legend told around the fireplace on winter nights. Colt never forgot the moment he'd walked into Hutchins' trading post and seen a bound woman whose eyes held more defiance than defeat. Never forgot the choice he'd made, one that had seemed simple in the moment but had reshaped his entire life. And he never regretted it. Ayla never forgot the man who'd cut her free without claiming ownership, who'd offered choice instead of control, who'd stood between her and death when every rational calculation said to step aside. Never forgot how foreign trust had felt at first, how slowly it had grown, how completely it had transformed her understanding of what was possible. They grew old together on that ranch, weathering the years as they'd weathered everything else. Together, stubborn, refusing to quit. And when Colt died peacefully in his sleep at 73, Ayla held his hand and whispered thanks for a life she'd never expected to have, for choosing her when he could have walked away, for proving that even in the harshest country, kindness could take root and flourish. She lived another 5 years after that, running the ranch with the help of their children and grandchildren, telling stories of the frontier when it was truly wild, when survival was uncertain and every day was a gamble. And on warm summer evenings, she'd sit on the porch they'd built together and look out at the land they'd claimed from chaos, and she'd smile. Because they'd done it. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, through violence and desperation and impossible choices, they'd built a life worth living. They'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and created light. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The frontier kept changing, civilization creeping north and west, transforming wild country into settlements and towns. But the ranch remained, a testament to two people who'd refused to be broken, who'd fought for the simple right to exist on their own terms, who'd turned survival into something approaching grace. Their great-grandchildren still work that land today, though they probably don't know the full story of how it began. Don't know about the trading post or the bounty or the desperate ride north into hostile territory. Those details have faded with time, smoothed into family legend and half-remembered tales. But the land remembers. The mountains that watched it all still stand. The creek still runs clear. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, you can almost hear echoes of two voices planning their next project, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to fix a fence, laughing at private jokes earned through shared survival. They built something that lasted. Not just a ranch, but a legacy of refusing to quit, of choosing each other, of believing that even the most broken people deserve a chance at peace. And they found it, together, on a piece of frontier land that became, against all odds, a home.